All right, we are live. Welcome everybody. This first live stream we've had in quite some time. We're hoping that we go off without any technical issues, but we'll apologize ahead of time. This is kind of a dry run here for us and a little pilot, so we'll see how it's going. Dan, Greg, how are you guys doing?
Doing well. Thanks for asking, Bill.
Yeah. How are you doing, Dan?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, regular, average, normal.
Average, normal.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. I heard a rumor, Greg, that you may or may not have gotten stung by a bee this morning. Is that correct?
This is true. This is true. Landed right on top of my head. Didn't know what it was. Thinking it could be any insect, not necessarily a bee. I just went to brush it out. First brush was unsuccessful, so went to like comb my fingers through my hair, and the web of my fingers ended up right on a stinger. So it's been a great day. If I.
That is intense. I'm sorry to hear that, man. Kind of crazy stuff. And
Okay. It's getting better. It's getting better.
that's good. Cool. Dan, any big updates for you today? Anything going on? Big stuff
Sure.
in your world?
Nothing too new. I mean, as you two both know, I just bought a house, so I'm in the process of moving all my stuff in. That's pretty big. But this morning in particular, haven't done much, haven't got stung by any pollinators. So again, just normal, average. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. Very cool. Well, sounds good. Well, I think we're going to jump into some AI tips and tricks today. And I invited Dan and Greg because Dan and Greg are both senior devs on our Veras app and going to keep me in check to make sure I don't say anything stupid. So thank you for that. Just to confirm too in the chat there, if everyone can kind of let us know that stream's working okay for you, you can hear the audio and video. And maybe just let us know where you guys are watching in from in the world. We'd like to know that. So that'd be super good. Greg and Dan, is everything working on your guys' side from the stream? Do you guys see it? Looks like it's okay.
Looks good.
So far,
for
so
me.
good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Sounds good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Again, we'd like to see a lot of communication there in the chat. Feel free to ask questions, comment. We're hoping this will be interactive and a good event for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and we will kick this bad boy off. So I'm going to share entire screen. There we go. All right, so today's point of topic is going to be AI for architects, various tips and tricks you may not have known about. So I'm hoping no matter if you guys have been using AI for a long time or have not, I'm hoping everyone will learn at least a few tips here during this. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it. Thank you, everyone that's commenting there in the chat. Manuel, Frank, Kyle, all good to hear from you guys. We're going to keep going here. Calling in from Bend, Oregon, Vancouver, all the way from England. Nice. I think it's getting later there in England. Thanks, Frank, for joining in there. That's good stuff. Keep the chats coming in. So we're going to talk about AI in architecture, but just a quick intro to who we are. We're EvolveLAB, basically a data-driven design and BIM automation company. We help architects, engineers, contractors implement design technology. And then we've also been working on quite a few different apps, some of them leveraging AI, some of them not. But that's what we do. The discussion topics for today is we're going to talk about what problems one of our AI tools is solving, which is Veras. Tips when you're considering rendering versus ideation, text prompt engineering do's and don'ts, tips for rendering your project in different seasons, styles, perspectives, and also how to re-render only parts of your AI image. So those are going to be our discussion topics. With that, I'm going to jump into it because I think Veras is kind of unique in a sense, and I want to talk about the problem that it's solving. And so kind of the problem, at least that I experienced when I first started using text to image generators such as Midjourney and others, though the quality is amazing with a lot of these tools, the challenge is it's not our actual project, right? So it doesn't actually take into consideration any of your setbacks, height constraints, your program, anything like that. It just simply, renders for you an image. And so the big differentiator is Veras uses that your model as a substrate. And so you can see here in this example where I have this Rhino model and I'm using Grasshopper to kind of parametrically change the geometry of it. It's updating that image over on the right here based on what that substrate is. So that's the big difference, is that it's your actual project. The other big difference with the tool is it actually plugs directly into your design environment. So whether you're using Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, Forma, Vectorworks, and very soon ArchiCAD, you'll be able to use the tool directly inside of those design authoring programs. But you can also use it in the web, which we'll talk about some of that as well. So, tip number one for using AI for rendering, ideation, or a hybrid of both is to use the geometry override. So, if you are looking to use AI and you want to use it just as a rendering tool and you don't want it to change any of your project, turn your geometry override all the way to the left to the low, and that will retain all of the geometry in there. If you want to use it more for ideation, crank it over to the right, and then the AI is going to have more creative freedom, and it will start to change your model quite a bit. And then you can kind of use a hybrid of that in between too, kind of gradation between these two metrics, going either from low or high or somewhere in the middle. So that is tip number one for rendering versus ideation, and how you can use this tool, to kind of get the output that you want. Dan, Greg, I don't know, do you guys have any comments on that? Am I completely off base here? Am I lying to everybody? Any thoughts or comments on this tip?
I can testify you speak the truth. No, I don't have anything to add. Sounds, yeah, at a high level, how that ends up working, how you would use those two sliders to achieve one, the other, or somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
like I find it handy at different stages of architectural design. Coming from an architecture background and conceptual design, I would turn the slider up and just let Veras go crazy. But if I'm just trying to work on a specific element of my building, or want to tweak little things without changing the overall form, slide it all the way down. Yeah, great use
Sweet.
cases.
Sweet. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the feedback. And then kind of diving a little bit deeper into this, just talking about using it to help expedite renderings. In a past life, I've worked in architecture, and I did a lot of rendering using a tool. You guys may have heard of 3ds Max, which has an extremely high learning curve. And so kind of the process was, you start to design your model, you apply your materials, you set up your lighting, apply your sky, your scene, and then we bring it into Photoshop to post-produce that. And there's other rendering tools that exist that are much, much more intuitive than 3ds Max, for example. But the process is typically the same with non-AI tools. You have to go through the same process of applying materials, getting your lighting set up just right, applying your sky scene, and post-producing it. And so with a tool like Veras, this is pretty cool because it kind of shortcuts the whole process, where you start with your design model and then you just prompt. And this completely fast tracks everything. So you can just prompt, what materials you want, what kind of season you want, the lighting, the shading you want. And then what's pretty incredible is, in most scenarios, you don't need to do much photoshopping at the end. Now, there is some things that you may want to do if there's any kind of like AI artifacts, or you want to start embellishing people and those kinds of things. Then you might use Photoshop for some of those kind of techniques. But in large, you shouldn't have to do a lot of those things, and it will help completely fast track this. So that's something to mention on the rendering and post-production side. And then this is just kind of like an image kind of showing the result of something you could expect when you're using these kind of AI image generators. The other piece I want to talk about is using Veras for the ideation side of it. And so typically when I was starting to do ideation or design concepts, typically we go to other tools to start to get ideas and inspiration from. And with like Pinterest, another method I would do a lot, and the fastest way I could try to create, a lot of design iterations, was using parametric modeling tools like Grasshopper or Dynamo. And we could kind of go through this kind of form rationalization, form finding exercise. And if you can kind of script it, you could kind of build the bones of parametrically how you want to flex it. But it still took quite a bit of time, and there's still quite a bit of a high learning curve with some of these tools. And so with generative AI, what we can do is we can upload that substrate, and we can prompt what we want, whether we want vertical slats or undulating balconies. We can set what kind of materials we want. And so, the crazy thing is, in about every 15 to 30 seconds, we get a new design option. And so the process is crazy fast and extremely efficient. So you can also use a lot of these kinds of tools, not just for the rendering, but also ideation, some of these buzzwords, generative design. It's using generative AI as the under the hood to actually produce the images. But that's another technique or a tip on the ideation side of it and how you could start to leverage tools like Veras for this piece of it. So Dan, Greg, I don't know if you guys have any comments on rendering versus ideation, comments on this piece?
No, I don't think so. Although I did have a delay in thinking, the same way that this feed is a little bit delayed. I started thinking about the geometry and material override sliders when you had asked before. And the one thing that I can say, one little tip I can provide for those of you who have used it before and kind of played around with it. And yeah, so there is like a certain cutoff with geometry override. We basically send your image to one of a few different AI models, basically, where this rendering takes place. And with geometry override, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's either 60 or 80, but I think it's either 60 or 80. And you might notice that there can be like what's a little bit more of an abrupt change in your results when you move the geometry override over that threshold, wherever it is. So that is something to be aware of. That is something to take note of. And maybe you've even noticed it if you've used the product a lot before, and now you're just getting an explanation for why that is.
Sweet. Good comment, Greg.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, for me, I was going to say, I feel like this is a game changer for just conceptually brainstorming ideas. I'm a little, biased because I'm helping build it, but I used to go around and, again, with the architectural background, sketch a bunch of buildings, look on Pinterest, look through some textbooks and some architecture firm websites I have for ideas. And I still do a lot of that, but I think these type of workflows with AI-powered image generation can just expedite the process. Like I'm still doing a lot of the other stuff, but I find I can get through so many more ideas. Like a lot of the ideas, I'm not going to go and build what pops up in the early stages, but it helps me inspire, think of a lot more variations and iterations early on, a lot faster, expedite, etc.
Like it. Good comment, Dan. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Dan. Continuing on here, I want to talk about some text prompts, do's and don'ts. This is actually a big shout out to Ben on our team. He actually authored a lot of these guides, and so I just took them and put them into the deck here. But kind of talking about, there's this new term being thrown out called text prompt engineering, and it's the idea of crafting a prompt and how you do that to set up the prompt for success in developing an image for you. And so there's a few different parameters that comprise a prompt. The first is going to be your subject. And this is like the core idea behind the image. Like, what are you doing? Is it a building? Is it a person? Is it a car, etc.? So you want to talk about like the subject, the aesthetic of the image, whether you want a oil painting, do you want it as a watercolor, a pencil sketch, etc. Styles and details of it, such as do you want it rustic, modern, minimal, etc. Lighting, color palettes, and names of artists that you might want to include in it. And then any additional details such as the weather, the season, camera angles, things like that. And so you can see here that I have a image that I produced, and you can see kind of what the prompt was as a cinematic shot. It's a parametric building in the style of Zaha Hadid, golden hour, Unreal Engine, 4K, sunny, and summer. And so this is how those different parameters work their way into a prompt. And then I'll kind of talk about some other examples of setting it up for success, some other do's and don'ts. But Dan, Greg, any comments on prompt engineering or setting up a prompt for success?
I think this is a great guide, and I just want to throw out there that we have a forum, and I think this is all outlined in a post somewhere with even more detail. Is that right? Yep. So maybe I'll find a link to it, but it's a good resource to learn more about this.
Sweet. Greg, any comments?
The only thing I would add, unless it's already in a subsequent slide, just about if you know Stable Diffusion and you know what certain punctuation or what certain special characters do. Some of those do actually make their way into the back end and they will be interpreted by Stable Diffusion. So if there was something that you wanted to put more emphasis on, what you can, like one of the specific phrases or words in Stable Diffusion, you put double parentheses around that. And okay, we do have that slide. So but yeah, you can put more emphasis on that, actually adding more and more parentheses to intensify that impact. But I'll let you speak more on it when you get there, Bill.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, good comment. So Greg's absolutely right. As you put parentheses in there, it does give more weight and bias to those words. So that's a good tip. In this example, you probably were laughing because you did notice I have quite a few parentheses. So even still, like I was doing like 3 parentheses and I still couldn't get like the snow coming out. But if I did like 6, I was able to get it. So I think the more and more parentheses you put in, the more weight it gives to those words. I was finally able to get that results from it. So that's a good one. Thanks for that, Greg. The other thing to do is to separate your statements by commas. This is also another thing that you can do to get greater success out of your prompt. So living room, comma, black sofa, comma, brown carpet. Those things are helpful in drawing out and getting better results, comma, separating your statements. Another thing not to do is not to tell the application what you don't want. So you don't want to say like remove bricks or erase the sky and replace it with a night shot. What you want to do is you want to give it the affirmative, building with a lot of glass, building with curvy wood facade, etc. And the reason for this is because, and not to get technical, but it's the idea of session persistence. And so this doesn't work that way. Similar, like session persistence is like Chat GPT, where it writes you a story and then you're like, okay, now give it to me in the style of Snoop Dogg, right? And then it'll give you the exact same story, but in Snoop Dogg's language, right? And so that is something that Veras does not do. It doesn't take an existing prompt or existing image, and then you're like, okay, now change this thing about it. It doesn't do that. So that is something to be aware of. You want to try to give it the affirmative of what you're trying to get it to render. The other thing you want to be careful with is clarity. If you put in the prompt, like timber construction, you will probably get something like what's over on the left here. And if you don't want a bunch of cranes in your project, you don't want that. You can put in timber building, and then you can get something like that's on the right. Greg mentioned the weights and biases for the parentheses, so that's very helpful in getting that. The other thing is prompt order. So the order in which you put a prompt, whatever's at the beginning, it's also going to give more weight to. So what you don't want to do is put whatever that main subject is all the way at the bottom of your prompt. You want to put that up at the beginning. So that's another thing to mention is the prompt order. And you can also prompt different render styles. So a lot of times people will see an image from Veras and they go, oh, like cool, like another photorealistic image. Well, if you actually have clients or customers that are more resonate with like watercolor or abstract pencil sketches, things like that, what is pretty crazy is that you can actually take your BIM or your SketchUp model or whatever design authoring software you're using, your 3D modeling software, and prompt it, and it will look like a pencil sketch or watercolor. So that is actually very fun. I've done a ton of renderings using different styles, and this is a really good way to create those different styles using Veras simply by a different prompt.
I'm gonna jump in and highlight the forum again because there's a lot of users out there, designers and such, who have come up with some really creative styles that I didn't even imagine you could do with Veras. So maybe I'll post a few of my favorites in the chat down here. And Bill's actually been working on a really nicely engineered, is that how you say it? Nicely engineered watercolor prompt, which we're going to be including as one of the preset settings in an upcoming release. So keep an eye out for that.
Sweet. Thanks, Dan. That is absolutely correct. Some cool new styles and prompts coming into new versions of Veras here very, very, very soon. And Dan's working very hard on that. Thanks, Dan. The other thing that is a tip when you're starting to craft your prompt is to kind of stage it. And so I use this analogy, kind of think of it almost like you're refining your image or your prompt. I tried not to use that word because we actually have a refine tool in Veras, but almost like pottery, where you're kind of like sculpting the final outcome of your image. You can kind of start to stage your prompt, set the first prompt as like modern building. And then maybe you're starting to play with like materials, modern building with red brick and large glass windows. And then something that I use a lot in my prompts is award-winning image or award-winning rendering of, and that always gets some really incredible results, in my opinion. And then you can start adding other details, such as the weather, or if you want it during golden hour, etc., to really get that polished outlook. Now, if you do already kind of know what you want, you can kind of fast track this and just go to step 3 or 4 on these, but sometimes this helps just starting to get the juices flowing for your image and for your building prompt of what you want to do. So the other tip is to use Chat GPT to help craft prompts. And I actually use this quite a bit because there's a lot of times like I have an idea, but I don't know how to describe it. And I don't know the words or the attributes that describe that idea. A good example of is one recently, like I wanted to do an image in the style of like anime, but I was like, what describes anime? Like, how do you describe the attributes or the image properties of an anime drawing or movie? And so I went to ChatGPT and I asked it to give me, a prompt that would help me with that. And these are some of the outputs and the results that I got, things that I would have never ever thought, to prompt Veras with. And so this is another way that you can start if you're not quite sure how to prompt. We do have that explore mode in Veras, but then this is kind of taking it to the next level too of using ChatGPT to craft prompts. Any comments or thoughts on that, Dan and Greg? And I'll also ask the group, feel free to throw some questions there in the chat if you guys have some questions or examples of what you guys have seen or used, what works, what doesn't work, questions you guys have for us about Veras or about AI. We'd be happy to answer some of those questions too. So feel free to keep those questions coming. But Dan and Greg, while we're waiting for any questions in the chat there, any comments on your guys' side?
There's one question to see a particular slide again with the, I think, comma separated prompts. But this is a good time to mention too, this whole video is going to be posted on YouTube after the fact. We'll post a link to that. So you'll be able to see all of this again and stare at it as long as you want. No worries there.
Sweet. Thanks, Dan. Any other comments or thoughts on using ChatGPT to craft prompts?
No, but I was going to comment. Obviously, this is a pretty specific use case, like trying to go for the anime. But I was going to relate it to something Dan said before about people using the forums and introducing some really cool styles and sharing what worked for them. And it just it reminded me of some renderings somebody shared that were in the style of like a graphic novel, and that was really. Is that one of the?
You could put, yeah, it's one of my favorites. I pulled it up it's in the chat. Maybe it's over here, or it depends what platform you're on. Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, Bill could even pull it up if he wants.
Totally. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Go ahead.
There's a whole bunch. It's worth looking at. We have a tag on the forum. Maybe I'll post that, specifically called Veras Gallery, I think, which are mostly images from people outside the EvolveLAB team just doing crazy things, or cool and crazy.
Totally. Yeah, feel free to throw that in the chat if you want, Dan, and I can pull it up later if there's time for sure. All right, we'll keep going here. And then these are just a few text prompt examples. The reason I was showing this is to kind of show the variety of images that you can get. So you can see like the one over on the left is kind of this like, I don't know, kind of animated, kind of dreamy kind of image. And you can see the prompt that we used here at the bottom. And then in the middle is like a watercolor image. And then over on the right is a very cinematic, kind of image. And so kind of showing the wide variety of image outputs that you can get from a lot of these AI tools is incredible. So The other thing that the first time I heard this idea of reverse prompting was actually on the Troxel podcast. So shout out to Evan Troxel, and Ben was on the podcast, and there's this idea of reverse prompting, and I was like, what the heck is that? And this is the idea of when you are starting to work within a tool like Veras, and you get an image back, and you're like, whoa, this is kind of cool. Like, I kind of like these downlights that just, showed up in my image. You can then start to take, some of that input from the image that you received and then put that into your prompt as well. So this tip is all about embracing reverse prompting, being inspired or influenced by an image that you might get from the rendered image. So kind of a cool little tip on that side as well. The other tip number 6, is your camera position matters. So these images, just to remember, this is all about machine learning. And so these tools have done a lot of machine learning on other images. And so if you have your camera position in such a way that there's probably not a lot in that data set with that camera position, such as like this bird's eye view that I have over on the left, there's probably just not a lot of images like something that's over on the left here. But over on the right, where you're kind of like at that human scale, where you have the horizon line, you have a sky, these kinds of things are, there's probably a lot of images for this that have been trained on, and therefore produce a better result from the AI. So this is the other tip, is to get your camera position into a certain place that makes sense. I will say though, in my experience, it hasn't done a horrible job of when you do have goofy kind of perspectives, because just this week I did one for a panoramic image, and someone asked about that, and I was like, probably isn't going to work real well, but let's roll the dice, and I did one with the panoramic image, and it actually did a really, really good job. I'll see if I can pull it up later. But in general, if you want to try to higher your success rate, set up your camera position to something that probably makes more sense. So that is that tip. Any comments, thoughts, questions on these, Greg or Dan, or anyone else in the chat? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Maybe just keep going. The tip number 7 is creating consistency from different perspectives.
Oh yeah, I think someone has already asked about this in the chat. Just FYI, they're getting ahead of us, ahead of you.
All right, this is good. So I'm going to preface this tip that this is a bit hacky. I'm not super proud of this workflow. And I will say, we can't say too much, but Greg has been working on something, and Jared on our team, on something that's going to be pretty crazy and pretty profound in helping with this issue specifically. So I'll preface that these are some more hacks than tips or tricks, but we do have some more legitimate solutions coming here very, very soon. So the first hack, I'll call it, is lowering your geometry override, your material override, and rendering from same seed. And this helps basically, so that way it reduces the amount of differences in different images or different perspectives that you're using. But I'll say that it's not perfect. So these are 2 examples where you can see my geometry and my material override are completely zeroed out. I'm using the same seed in both images. They do have similar attributes, but you can see things like the legs and the chairs are still quite different from each other. So this solution is still not perfect. One that I've had better success with actually is taking a bunch of the views, say in a tool like Revit, dropping those onto a sheet, and then rendering those 4 images concurrently with one render. And so this is an example of that, where you can see, especially the images on the bottom of the screen, both perspectives look very similar. The tables look the same, the chairs look the same, the plates look pretty much the same. And so this is another way that you can start to create some consistency when you're using different perspectives. There's probably some other methods too. Dan and Greg, I don't know if you guys know of any, but these are kind of the 2 that I'm aware of and that I've used that I've had greater success on. But I do know you guys are working on some stuff that's going to be pretty profound in helping resolve this as well. But yeah, any comments on these two suggested workflows?
This is cool. I've not seen this idea before. It is kind of a cool hack. Yeah, but I'm excited to see what Greg's working on to get around this.
Yes, not even Dan knows.
That's right. Yeah,
No, it's
we're
not
gonna
true.
we're keeping it under wraps. It's gonna be a surprise.
Anyway,
So
I was going to ask, did you go over the seed feature, or is that coming up?
I did. So that was this guy
Briefly,
here, that if
yeah.
you do use the same seed, and I'll actually show some other techniques for using the same seed, especially when trying to render different seasons here later.
Right. We'll get into it more. Someone just asked about it, but essentially the seed helps you produce similar renderings, like similar style, when your model or camera angle changes.
Yep.
And sort of, yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yep.
I guess we'll see more.
Yep. So render from same seed. And Dan, you actually do a good job of explaining this. I don't know if you want to, like, you always talk about, like, without the seed, it invokes like randomness, versus if the seed, it's, I always call it, like, in layman's term, a like this mode. Do you want to talk about the seed for just a second?
I could dive into it. I think it's a really cool feature that Greg actually implemented. This Greg right there, right?
Nice.
Top of the mountain. Anyway, yeah, what it does, all these AI generations, the text, the image, etc. Technically they're deterministic, and they can produce the exact same image over and over. Since we want to use them to generate ideas, we introduce the randomness. And the seed is kind of like the number that controls the randomness. So if you put in the same seed and the same exact Revit model image, I shouldn't say Revit, SketchUp, wherever your image is coming from, you can produce almost the exact same result. But the cool thing is you can keep the seed the same and change the model, and then render two different design options, per se, in the exact same style for comparison purposes.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. And I'll show some other examples too here, specifically on getting the same result in different seasons and weather, etc. So there'll be some cool things here we'll dive into. So we'll talk about rendering the same building in different seasons. So in here, the tip for this one is to not use your original substrate when you are rendering for different seasons. And I found this out the hard way. So I'm going to try to save you guys the trouble. So what do I mean when I say this? For example, in this example, I'm using Autodesk Forma. I rendered this image, and then I tried using this same session of Veras and just changing like the prompt of like winter, summer, fall, etc. And even using the same seed, but it was still kind of changing my model a little bit because my prompt had changed. You know, the weather was influenced the output of my image. The reason for this is because it's not using this middle image to iterate upon. What it's doing is it's using that original underlaying substrate. So what you see here on the left and the right. And so because of that, with it using this as the substrate, not the middle image, and with changing the prompt, it would still change it too much. So the suggested workflow that I'm going to throw out there is to, once you get an image that you like, save that rendered image to be used in the web version of Veras. Okay, so if you're in Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, Forma, Vectorworks, ArchiCAD, etc., doesn't matter, or even in the web version, once you get that image that you want, save that image out, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to launch the web version of Veras and bring that image into Veras. Now, the reason is because it's now going to use this new image as our substrate instead of that original one, this kind of like gray blocky background, for example. So now it's going to use this new image as the new substrate. And then what you're going to do is you're going to copy paste the prompt and the seed, and you're also going to change the geometry override to 0. So that way it's not changing the geometry. And kind of using this process, you now get much, much more consistent imagery from different seasons. So you can see here, my seed is locked. I'm using that new image as the substrate. All I'm doing is changing the prompt from, you know, winter to summer to fall, etc. And you can see that it's doing a pretty good job of retaining the original design here without changing it much. So this is a technique that I've had better success on when trying to render, different seasons. So this is one that I wanted to throw out there as well. Any comments, thoughts, or questions on this from anyone in the chat, or from you, Dan or Greg?
This is cool. I think it's really handy. I want to mention keeping the seed works really well when you have the exact same camera angle. It's not as successful when you start rotating around the model.
Yep. Exactly.
Well,
Good comment.
I'll post this. There's a great example that Ben G on our team made, where he used the same seed for a construction sequencing project, same camera angle, but the first one was just the foundation. The second one was the foundation and the framing, etc. I thought that was a cool use case too.
Totally. Yeah, agreed.
Just want to, I don't think we addressed this question yet from the YouTube chat. Manuel said that the projects we upload into Veras or the pictures we generate, are they used to teach Veras AI for future pictures? And the answer to that is no, we do not. And there is maybe like, this is different, but in the future, we may use some of the renderings for analysis, but that would be something that the user has the right to decline. You don't have to agree to the analytics. But yeah, that is something we'll do in the future. But to be clear, we would not be teaching the Veras AI with your outputs, at least not for this foreseeable future. It's not something that's in our roadmap.
Yeah, we don't save any images, train off of anything like that. It just goes, so the model comes back to you.
That's right. Thanks, Dan and Greg, for mentioning that. And just another tip or comment is that we do have our end user license agreement, our privacy policy. So if you guys are interested in taking a deeper dive on that, we can send that over to you guys. But without getting into the legalese and speaking in layman's term, Dan and Greg are 100% correct. We don't do any kind of machine learning on your images, nor do we plan on doing that. And we do have, just to reiterate Greg's comment, there is a acceptance or decline for the analytics piece. So when you're launching it, you can decline that for any kind of future learning.
Yeah.
So,
and I should also mention, just like most web data collectors, there's minimal analytics to like make sure the app is working and stuff. What features are getting? It's all anonymized. Which is, someone actually asked me a while ago if they could get data about how their firm's using Revit, and I had to tell them, sorry, I'm not Revit Veras. I'm like, sorry, we don't have access to that.
Yep. Good comment, Dan.
Yeah, it's dangerous data to even worry about saving.
Yep, for sure. Cool. Okay, so tip number 9, just to keep going here, is going to be using the render selection to re-render only parts of your image. And Dan, actually, this is a feature that you worked really extensively on, I believe. And so this, I don't know if you want to speak to this one, Dan, how like use cases for the render selection or ideas around this. But I think this just starts to give people more control, right? So that way they don't have to re-render, say, an entire image, but they can just re-render parts of it if they like the overall composition, etc. Right?
Yeah, exactly. This is a, I don't know, really useful feature. I think, Bill, you were there. We were visiting an architecture firm around Denver, and someone was showing us in the early days how they were using Veras, and they were making renderings and pulling them out into Photoshop and making masks and sort of combining them. So, and we thought that was really cool. So this is just a way for you to do that in the app and sort of have AI contextual awareness. Like you can render a window, but this engine knows like it's inside a window frame or that where the edge of the joint between the two buildings is, and will sort of make an intelligent buffer between them.
That's right.
Instead of stitching it together, like one rendering has one thing you like, but something you don't like, or it has this weird part you just want to change. Just expedites, speeds up. Yeah.
Yep. Really good use cases. Sweet. And I'm also just going to use this opportunity to keep giving shout outs too. Want to give a shout out to Phil Chan. I know Phil really well. Good to hear from you, buddy, as well as Patrick Lee in Omaha. So for those that don't know, I used to live in Omaha. I visited Pat's office there. They're doing some really awesome stuff. So keep up the great work, Pat. Give a shout out to you as well. So really good stuff coming from his firm out there in Omaha, Nebraska. Cool. We keep going here. Keep the questions coming in the chat. We want to make sure we're getting those. I do see
have
another
a
one.
question. Sorry to interrupt you, Bill. We do have a question from Frank. Can I use Veras to generate a walkthrough?
Ooh, good question. Not yet. Again, some things are coming that we think you'll be able to do those kinds of workflows. In the interim, something that I've been using is Runway. It's an AI tool that converts images to videos. That's the closest that I know of that exists to get you kind of a walkthrough or fly through kind of experience. But not yet is the short answer. Thanks, Greg. Any other questions in the chat?
I think we're all caught up.
All right, sounds good. So continuing on, this other feature, which is kind of a sub to the render selection, is this blend tool. This is quickly becoming my new favorite feature in Veras. And so what this does is it will take whatever you use the render selection for to generate your new image. It will then blend that original image with its surroundings. So it looks more cohesive as an image. So you can use that blend to make sure that there's not any real harsh, cutoffs from the original image and the context that it sits inside of. Dan, I think you worked on this feature, right, as well? Is this you?
Yeah, not muted. I helped out with it a little bit.
Sweet. Any comments or suggestions for people to get the most out of the blend tool, or
Just play around with it. It could depend based on each, little render selection thing you want to change. I find, yeah. Like sometimes I'll turn it down if I have a really strict boundary, like, I'm iterating on a window inside of a facade. But a lot of times for the landscape and setting around the building, I'll have a higher blur value. That's just me. I don't know how y'all end.
Yeah,
Agree with that. Yeah.
cool. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Greg. All right, so I thought what we would do is get out of PowerPoint for the remaining time that we have, and we could do a little live demo. So with that, I'm going to start Veras, but I want to ask those that are in the chat, throw in some different prompts you'd like to see, some different ideas, different styles, and we will do those live here on the fly. We'll try to get some, and there's a little bit of delay between us and the streaming. Maybe about 30 seconds or so, but we'll try to get those implemented into the text prompt, and then also try to answer any other questions that everyone has. So with that, let me stop sharing this screen and I'll open up Forma and Veras and we'll check that out. So
Yep. And while you're transitioning, we do have another question. Matt was asking, would it be possible to replace a specific material with another using the refine tool? And I guess we can elaborate a little bit on the hint that was dropped before by Bill about what I've been working on recently, and what I've been working on will allow for that to be able to be done. So being able to have some finer control over specific aspects of the substrate or your renderings that are coming out. And yeah, it will be more than just being able to outline a portion of a rendering and sending it to Stable Diffusion. You will be able to be a lot more selective with surfaces or certain objects. So that is where we're heading. But you cannot do that yet, to answer your question.
Well, yeah, but as a workaround, you can sort of control that in your original model and then use the render selection tool and updating the materials and the material override slider to control how much what you have in your model is used or not used. Maybe you have like a very specific pattern from a specific manufacturer, texture or something you want to get in there. I think you could use the selection and the override settings to help you get there.
Good suggestion, guys. Thanks. All right. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and opened up Autodesk Forma. And so I have this model here. We built out, we as in Greg, you built out this integration of using Veras as an extension inside of Forma. And so you can see here's the extension. I've gone ahead and launched it. This is actually a prompt I never used before. I just thought of it on the fly here while I was on the call. I did do some cyberpunk stuff before, but it's mainly pink and and not this model. So I wanted to test like using this kind of prompt, and you can see I've bumped up my geometry override quite a bit here. So it's taking a lot of creative freedom, to change the model. It's still using that substrate. This rendering took 29 seconds. This one took 32. This one took 35. So in about a minute, I have 4 different design options using generative AI and Veras with my Forma model. And these are some of the results I'm getting. Another thing, just talking about building out our prompt, is I started to think about, I didn't prompt the background. So it kind of just did whatever it wanted. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put city background on here.
Hey, Bill.
And yes.
What do you think about some parenthesis rain? Someone asked for it in the chat.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, rain really hard. I can't.
Go ahead.
Like 6 parentheses. I'm trying to count them, but it's hard. I'm squinting at my screen.
Yeah, I did 3 just now. We'll see what we get. If we don't get the result we want, let's go ahead and we'll add some more parentheses. Good suggestion.
Yeah, and that's another example where you can you can turn on the seed. And then if you change just the parentheses in the prompt, you can see the effect that just that small change had, since you're using the same random seed across iterations. Another way to use that tool, the seed tool, is help you refine what your other settings are actually doing.
That's right. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we got some pretty good rain actually coming in on these images, and I really like the style and the quality of these. You can see the city background. The other thing I was going to mention that we didn't talk about in the PowerPoint is also this atmospheric, and I'll just do a few more of those. Maybe I'll do 2, and let's turn on that same seed and just see what we get here, see if we get some similar results. And we'll also do the atmospheric, so that way you can kind of see what it does with some of this. It basically adds like this fog or mist to your image as well, which is actually really appropriate for a scene where it's rendering. Where it's raining, excuse me. So we'll do a few of those. Any other comments in the chat? Comments or questions from you, Dan or Greg?
Well, Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure. There might be some prompt ideas in the chat. I'm not totally sure what they are. I think someone, maybe they know you, was thinking of emailing you an image. So if something pops up and you have a chance to bring it in, feel free.
Okay. Sounds good.
Some more ideas in the chat. So if you see one you like, Bill, feel free to try it out.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, basically, with these pill buttons that we have, they are kind of like, the way it works is they are kind of like little snippets of prompts. And so another future kind of offering that we have in the application, not too far away, is that you'd be able to actually save your own little pill buttons. So instead of just having those 4 there, the is interior, that is aerial view, turbo nature, etc. You could have a piece of a prompt that you like, and you realize that it gives you some pretty predictable and effective results. And so you actually save that into a little pill form. And so you can just check it, uncheck it, just kind of help speed up the process and improve the way that you would synthesize prompts and put prompts together. So.
Thanks, Greg. Cool. And I did see in the LinkedIn chat, we're streaming both LinkedIn and YouTube. I saw in the LinkedIn chat to add a more urban environment, motion blur of cars in front of the building. So I went ahead and added that to the prompt. I turned off the seed so that way we could get quite a few of different kinds of options, see what we get here. And also the motion blur I added as well. And so you can see that we are getting some of that as an output and a result. So here's some great suggestions, and we are getting, and it's doing a pretty decent job of cars. Some of these make sense, some of them don't, but overall, I think it's okay. And that's some of the things that AI is getting better and better with every iteration. Is sometimes you get some weird artifacts with when you're doing rendering with AI, but with every new render release that we have and every new render engine, it's getting better and better. And just to tease it out, we are working on a new render engine that's going to even further improve some of the quality. I was testing some of this with Ben last Friday, and I'm very, very encouraged by some of the results that we were seeing. So a new render engine is going to come, not just to tease that out a little bit. So watch out for it. All right. Any other things I could try to do? Maybe we'll get away from some of the rain, and maybe we could try to do some happier shots here. Maybe we'll do like one of my favorite is like golden hour or sunset. And this is something that I learned when I was doing rendering and how much it changes, just the mood of a rendering. We'll say sunny too. And let's just see what we get as some different results there. Well, I'm doing that. Any other comments that are coming in from the chat, Dan or Greg?
Well, I haven't, not super recently, but I'd mentioned that if you have your own ideas, there's a free trial for this online or to download. I posted the link so you can, try it out. See all your ideas realized. Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, so different.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting, just like the psychology of sun and a sunset, like how much this is kind of just changes your mood and your outlook versus if you see a shot like this?
I would imagine, I'm not sure, but the way these models are trained, I bet those sort of emotional qualities are also tied to the tags and the images. Like in general, if people have images tied to the word sad, it's probably more likely they contain rain than not. So you might get that. If you type rain, you also might get like sad photo effects.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Dan, for sure.
Yeah. I started diving into it once. It's way too technical for me to fully understand, but the way the words are associated in Stable Diffusion with images and pieces of images and individual pixels is quite fascinating, and how all the words are mapped to each other. Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
Cool,
totally agree. Cool. I'm doing just a few more renderings here. Again, I'm kind of being, oh yeah, go ahead. Do you have a comment, Dan?
Someone said to add more nature, and I was thinking about, I'll see if I can pull it up. There's this building in the city I live in, they just built, that's supposed to have a forest garden kind of going through the middle that you can see from the outside. But they're almost finished building it. I'm not sure the exact stage, but none of the plants have grown yet. So it's just empty concrete, etc., where the garden should be. But that'd be a cool one to sort of speed up, fix, add the vegetation instead of waiting for nature.
Totally. Yeah. So again, another piece that we haven't talked about is that turbo nature. So I'll turn that on, show you guys. I also added a few more of those in the prompt just to help it out. But if you turn on this turbo nature, that will add more plants, vegetation. I did put in the prompt biophilic design, also added, plants growing, vines, etc., to even further emphasize that idea. So you can kind of use a combination of both turbo nature as well as the prompt to really start to get more plants and vegetation. I think that's a good suggestion. There we go. Another result. Another one came in. Another one. And again, my geometry overrides up pretty high. So we're getting, quite a few different variations here. Again, kind of using this on the ideation side and kind of a hybrid of ideation and rendering where we can get some really beautiful renderings, but then in about every 30 seconds, we're getting a new design option, which is pretty cool. I think it's changing just a little bit too much from the model. So though I'm going to bring it back just a little bit. So that way it's still trying to honor more of that kind of footprint that we originally had. So I'm going to lower that and do just a few more. And then just to kind of round us out here, I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't yet got a chance to try it, or if you even have tried it in the past, we're continuing to add more and more features. The render selection motion blur has been improved. There's some other new features that we mentioned that we're working on. We have the new render engine that was released, I think, in 1.5. And so a lot of those kinds of things, if you tried it, say, a year ago, it's really a different tool, than it was a year ago. The results and the output you get are quite a bit different, and as well as the features. So those are a few of those. I also want to give a shout out to Pierre. I get to interact with Pierre quite a bit on LinkedIn. Good to see you, Pierre. I see another one, add more nature to okay, that was the nature comment. We got that in there. So what I'm going to do is just, as Dan mentioned, we do have the forum post, and I'll go ahead and open up my browser really quick, and I'll just show you guys. If we go to EvolveLAB Veras, if I can type in right, EvolveLAB Veras. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
So we got a question in the chat while you were going there, down. Just about some of the weird sunset reflections. Like, for example, you can see a sunset reflection maybe in the incorrect direction. The sun's in the back. This happens sometimes. This AI generation isn't that smart, but as you add more context to your model, say you export the model with the correct sun shading, then Veras will do a better job at more realistic lighting and shadows based on the orientation.
Yeah, good comment, Dan. I don't think I did a good job of having like good shadows as the input. So your image matters, your shadows matter, and you do get better results as an output. And the other thing I'd mention just quickly is with some of these tools is that the analogy is these AI tools are kind of in their infancy. So though they're very powerful right now, they still have some quirks with them. And so but every few months they get better and better and better. So I also anticipate some of that being resolved as well. So the thing that I want to kind of close on as we're getting close to time here is that if you are interested in trying it for yourself, you can go to evolvelab.io/Veras or just Google EvolveLAB Veras, and you'll come to the landing page here. You can download it for Windows. You can download it for Apple. Depending on what you have. I think we support SketchUp for Apple. I don't think Rhino yet. We have the web version. We have Vectorworks that supports both Windows and Apple, right, Greg? I'm not misspeaking in that.
Vectorworks SketchUp for Apple, if that was your question. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Greg.
And
So you can download.
Architect. Yeah.
Yep. And then Architect's coming. So we have, you can do Windows, Apple, or you can launch in the web. And then if you're interested in getting started, you can go to this forum and support. And we have quite a few different, workflows, for example, that you can go to. And in here, there'll be some different, techniques and text prompts that you can use if you're just starting to get into it. So that's the other takeaway I would say is get in there, do the trial. If you run into any snacks, please hit us up. We're very active on the forum, but you can go to this Veras workflows, and that should also be helpful as well. I also want to thank Dan and Greg for coming in and helping field questions and contributing to the conversation. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Any last comments you guys say to everyone listening to the stream? I'll give you guys the last word.
Just looking forward to delivering more features. I know we talked about some exciting things, some things that'll really bring the app, to the next level. And yeah, we'll keep working hard to try to get there. Yeah. And, thanks for your questions. Great questions, everybody.
Good questions, good feedback. If you guys have more feedback, feel free to post it on the forum. We're pretty active listening on there. Like Greg and I are two of the people who work directly on this. So I feel like if enough people are excited about something, we get excited about it and just add it. So any ideas, we love to hear them.
Sweet. Thanks, Dan. Thanks everybody for listening in and contributing to the chat. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you guys.